a diet which is rich in vegetables, whole grains, nuts and beans. That can reduce premature deaths by up to 30%. Less than 1% of us actually achieve what is called a healthy diet, because the food environment around us makes the unhealthy choice the automatic one. What's it got to do with sustainability? We are still living in a time where the awareness between our own health and the health of the planet isn't broadly understood, but it does really, really matter. Eating for people and planet is not about elimination or less choice or less options. It's about thinking through balanced patterns and diverse choices and flexibility, and also flavour and joy.
Whose responsibility is it for making the planetary health diet happen? And can I just say, nobody likes being told what to eat.
People really want to be living in areas where the food system is prioritised. They want their kids to have access to healthy food.
Welcome to the In Good Taste podcast, the podcast on food matters for food lovers. I'm Mallika Basu, food writer, speaker and advisor. Each week we bring you sharp, snackable conversations about what's shaping the way we eat and drink across kitchens, cultures and continents. From big issues to bite-sized trends, it's all on the table. Today we're talking about eating for the health of the planet with the force of food and nature, that is Ali Morpeth. Ali is a registered nutritionist and expert on eating for our health and that of the planet, and a dear friend. And her little black book of nutrition experts is second to none, and I routinely irritate her with brain picking. So delighted to have you here with us, Ali.
Thank you so much. You are welcome to brain pick anytime.
Excellent. Be careful what you offer me here, by the way. You know I'll be back on the blower. Ali, tell me, you are such an expert in on this subject matter. Did you just wake up one morning and go, do you know what? I'm just going to join the dots between our health and that of the planet. How did you get into this?
Basically, that is what happened, honestly. So I don't know if I've told you this story before, Mallika, but I was for a long time just working as a public health nutritionist. And all of the focus of my work was around improving diet quality. So what can we do to get people to eat healthier diets? How is that going to improve their health? And I was particularly focused on kids and young children. And one morning I just realised that everything that we were trying to achieve in public health nutrition was also a lever for planetary health. But I think that was particularly stark for me because I grew up in a very rural community in the Lake District on the side of a lakeland fell. So I was surrounded by agriculture. It was a very rich farming community and food had always been part of my life, right? And it wasn't until I was working in public health that I realised that so many of the different things that we were trying to achieve as nutritionists were also levers to improve planetary health, land use, biodiversity, farming systems, etc. But nobody was really looking at that. So I did honestly wake up and think, this is weird. Like, why as nutritionists are we just focused on how diet patterns are impacting our health without linking that back to the planet? And from that day, I just made a really deliberate switch to go and do something different and to try and go and find a career as a nutritionist in sustainability.
Wow. And you've come so incredibly far, haven't you? Because you've just spotted an absolute gap in the middle of those two things that you've plugged. So tell me, Ali, I'm going to ask you a controversial question to start. Is it actually possible to eat for our health and that of the planet? And is this what is meant by the term healthy, sustainable diets?
Yes, it is absolutely possible to eat for our health and the health of planet. And Mallika, we've got loads of science that also proves that. So there are lots of models for healthy diets. And I think your audience might have heard of some of them. So things like Mediterranean diets or flexitarian diets, indigenous diets. But the one diet model that we quite often use in our work is called the Planetary Health Diet. And that was developed by the Eat Lancet Commission, which is a collaboration of over 60 scientists from 16 countries around the world. And essentially that looks at how you can feed a global population of 10 billion, because that's how many of us there are going to be, a healthy diet within the planet's means. And what's really powerful about it is that that diet, or that way, that pattern of eating, doesn't just improve human health outcomes, it also works with the planet's ecological limits. And that's what we call planetary boundaries that keep the Earth stable. And helps with things like climate change, biodiversity, freshwater use, and those other planetary issues as well. So it is absolutely possible to eat for the health of people and planet. And now what we need to do is turn that really good science into action, everyday action that everybody can get behind.
We're going to get that. Now, is this Eat Lancet thing where 700 people went to Stockholm and it was like the biggest party on the planet that I wasn't invited to?
Why didn't you come? You should have been in Stockholm.
I don't know, I should have. But it literally felt like everyone went to Stockholm. There was no one left on the planet talking about these things.
There were 700 people in Stockholm, so it was a mega food moment. And the first Eat Lancet Commission was 2019, right? And that was the first time that anybody had published the idea of a planetary health diet. And this year, 6 years later, we've got 6 more years of science, which just strengthens the evidence base about how we can eat for people and planet. There was an almighty launch moment in Stockholm, Mallika. And as well as that launch moment, your listeners might have seen some press coverage, because I think there was something like 2,600 media items in the first weekend of the publication. So it's a really big moment for the food system.
Wow, this sounds incredible. Now, when in 2019 this came out, and by the way, I know you're not a spokesperson for Eat Lancet and we have lots of things to cover, so we're going to move on very swiftly. But I want to just remind everyone who's listening that you actually contributed, so you were part of the cohort of experts that contributed to Eat Lancet, is that right?
So I'm not an Eat Lancet commissioner, although I very much support the work of the commission. What we have been doing is working with a brilliant organisation called the World Business Council for Sustainable Development to turn the very good science of Eat Lancet from the commission into a briefing document to get businesses to start implementing the science through their everyday operations, because that is how we're going to be able to scale a planetary health diet, which is great for human health and also improves our planetary outcomes as well.
Fantastic. So we're going to look in more detail about what that involves eating and not eating. But can you explain to me why food is such an important factor in all of this for the health of the planet?
Yeah, of course. So I think it's really bizarre actually, Mallika, because when you're working in food, all of this just makes so much sense. And most of my friends, they don't work in food, right? And when I talk about the work I'm doing, they're like, what? What has this got to do with the environment? What's it got to do with sustainability? We are still living in a time where the awareness between our own health and the health of the planet isn't broadly understood, but it does really, really matter. So let me give you a couple of my key stats that we often use. We know that if you shift a global population to eat a planetary health diet, so that's a diet which is rich in vegetables, whole grains, nuts and beans, we're going to talk about beans in a minute, and also some animal foods, that can reduce premature deaths by up to 30%. So in other words, food is a really important lever for improving human health all over the world. But the other thing that it can do is cut our food-related emissions by about a half. So at a time when we know we have accelerating climate change, the role that food systems play in bringing us back in line with planetary boundaries is really, really important. And in fact, I would go as far to say we can't tackle climate change unless we make food part of our pathway for doing that.
So it's incredibly important. In fact, it's almost, you can't separate those two things, can you? And
Exactly.
when you say emissions, we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, so GHG emissions.
Greenhouse gas emissions. So if people are interested, I would really encourage them to go and look at the publication from Eat Lancet, because in that, the Commission doesn't just look at carbon or greenhouse gas emissions. It looks at the food system's contribution across 9 planetary boundaries. So climate change is one planetary boundaries, but there are many other, like for example, biodiversity in nature, fresh water, nitrogen and phosphorus, and various things. So actually food has a really important role to play in planetary health beyond just climate change, which is clearly important in its own right.
Now, yes, like you, I work in food. In fact, it probably wouldn't be an exaggeration to say I live to eat and drink. That's like
Yeah,
my
okay.
life
I'm
revolves
with
around
you.
this stuff. And now this is all slightly worrying because I'm wondering how that translates to what our plates are going to look like, the food that we're cooking and eating. So you touched a little bit on, more plants, nuts, beans. Can you give me an example of what, say, a healthy planetary plate might look like?
Yeah, I can definitely give you an example of that. So, I mean, it's probably things that people already know about, right? So it's a diet which is predominantly based around loads of different plant-based foods, also with a moderate amount of animal source foods as well. So a framing that I think is quite useful is to think about this as a diverse plate, primarily made up of fruits and vegetables with plenty of things like legumes and beans. Also nuts and seeds would be part of what would make up that planetary health plate. And then within that, there is definitely the flexibility in the space for animal proteins as well. Sometimes the debate can get quite polarized, but it's really important to recognize that thinking about planetary health eating does not exclude animal source foods from the diet. It's a flexible diet. And in fact, it might include up to a portion a day of dairy and then another animal source food as part of your diet as well. So maybe some chicken or some fish, or maybe once a week some red meat, something like that.
Well, I'm glad we're not getting rid of my steak because, we do like a little bit of nice meat. And I'm definitely not vegetarian, although I try my best. But that sounds entirely reasonable, actually. And it's just about working
Exactly.
with what suits the family. I think the challenge sometimes is, and you and I both know this because we have kids, is you also have to work with the family. And,
Yeah.
I had a child who was vegetarian for a few years, and along the same time, I had a daughter, a teenager, who was entirely carnivorous. And, it's incredibly hard to then follow a rigid structure, but we found a way to make our meals predominantly veg-led and then incorporate meat as and when, or meat-based products as and when it worked, basically. So it doesn't sound that tricky.
No, I think looking at this through the lens of flexibility is really important, and thinking about patterns rather than absolutes is also really important. And I think we're going to come on to talk about kind of the wider food environment, Malika. But for sure, this is not about eating for people and planet. Is not about elimination or less choice or less options. It's about thinking through balanced patterns and diverse choices and flexibility, and also flavor and joy. Like, I think often as a scientist we forget to talk about those things, and it's a really good reminder when I'm in touch with you about, we need to make this joyful and aspirational and exciting for everybody.
Definitely. I mean, one of the things I wrote about in my Good Food, Planet Friendlier feature was that it shouldn't be about deprivation, because
No.
actually one of the biggest learnings from being predominantly vegetarian when my son turned was that we discovered so many new things that have just stayed with us, And like I learned to cook vegetables and ingredients and played around with textures that I never would have if we'd still built all our meals around basically what used to be carbs and meat.
Yeah.
So that was a really good lesson that I think people forget, that you're not just taking stuff away. Think about what else you're adding to the mix. And if you're a
Exactly.
cook and a food lover, I mean, this is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And thinking about the role of flavour and spices and things in that as well, because as you know, ingredients change, right, according to how we cook them and how we prepare them. So you can have a cabbage which can taste like the most delicious cabbage in the world if it's cooked really beautifully with lots of different flavours and spices. That I think there is endless possibilities when it comes to plant-based and planetary health eating.
Okay, well, that's all pretty positive, Ali, so far. I was slightly worried about what you were going to tell us, but this is all good
Don't you
stuff.
worry,
So
Malika.
now, now the other thing is, hilariously, I have a friend in India who said to me, "What's all this beans thing? Yeah, why is everyone going crazy for beans?" Because of course, for a lot of our cultures in the global majority, beans form a very fundamental and delicious part, beans and pulses of our diets and our daily meals, right? So there's this big campaign called Beans is How that I know you're very involved in. Why don't you tell us a little bit what the fuss is about beans and pulses and how it links to the whole conversation about planetary health and personal health?
Yeah, well, I think, Malika, since we've known each other, I've been banging on about beans. So, Beans is How is a global campaign to double bean consumption, because you're right, in some countries around the world, beans and pulses form a really core part of the diet. But in other places, like the UK, where we're talking from today, we actually do not eat very many beans and pulses at all. But beans and pulses are super diverse, they're fibre rich, they're full of micronutrients, they're recommended as part of a healthy diet, both in terms of a protein based ingredient, but also they count as one of your 5 a day in the UK. So beans are really brilliant for improving human health outcomes. The other thing that beans do, though, is they're great for the environment. So growing beans within food production systems, they can take nitrogen from the air and fix it into the soil. So that helps us with climate change. There are also many different varieties of beans. So they're a really good crop to introduce biodiversity to our farming and our land use systems. And we are, at Planetary Alliance, we are absolutely obsessed about beans because they're one of the food groups that we see as a real opportunity to both improve human health through exciting, joyful and delicious food, and also help us again with that piece on improving planetary outcomes both through the same time. So as of January, there will be a new campaign for the UK to double its consumption of beans. And what we're hoping is that there will be a big effort from influencers, from businesses, from restaurants, everybody to put more beans on the menu to help us both improve our health and also help the planet as well.
Well, it sounds like that should definitely be a podcast episode, Ali. You might hear from me later in the year to find out how to do this. But, I think you're on to something. The beans thing is just a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. And the saddest thing I feel about that is apparently as cultures and communities, they get wealthier, beans are actually falling out of the diets, which is such a shame because, the potential and the taste and the joy they bring is tremendous.
I completely agree with you. And the other thing, and one of the reasons that people like the Food Foundation and Veg Power are backing this campaign to double bean consumption is that they're affordable. So I think, Mallika, through the work that you're doing, there's some questions about, how we can make this exciting for people, how we can make sure people have got great recipe ideas and the cooking skills and all of those other things that surround beans. But beans are a really affordable, nutrient-dense food for families. So focusing on beans gives us a real opportunity to do more for people and the planet.
Well, that's music to my ears. Social inequity, as you know, is a big thing for me. You said protein, and of course, beans are a great source of protein that is an alternative to meat-based protein. Do you have any thoughts on cultivated meat or other sources of protein that you wanted to share? I think I probably will do a separate podcast episode on that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about, fake meat, basically.
Yeah, well, I think it would be really interesting to do a podcast on this. And it's really interesting because we were speaking at Blue Earth Summit last week, and there was a question about cultivated meat from the audience, and it really divided the panel. And I think often in the food system that happens at the moment where there isn't necessarily agreement from everybody. I'm a pragmatist, Mallika, so I want to see solutions that help us move forward from where we are today to where we can be tomorrow. And so for me, cultivated meat is one of the tools in our toolbox that we can use at the time and the moment that we are in to improve our climate and our planetary system. I think we've seen some really good examples of where it might play a role. So, for example, in pet food, I think there is a clear role for not raising animals and using our land and our resources to raise animals that necessarily go into a pet food supply chain. So that would be one area where there might be a role for cultivated meat. I think there's also some really interesting work coming through on kind of regulatory systems and environments where cultivated meat has been approved for certain uses. We're not there in the UK, but certainly we need to be thinking about, given the moment that we are in and the harm that the food system is currently driving across many planetary boundaries, could cultivated meat be one of the levers that we have in our toolkit to improve the system? And I would love for you to do a podcast on that.
Okay, well, you're now I have your blessing, Ali. Maybe we do explore this further. On this stuff about, reshaping and rethinking what goes on our plates, because it's better for us, it's also better for nature and the environment. Of course, we do what we can, but we are also functioning within the confines of, budgetary constraints and what is available around us and all of those things. So whose responsibility is it for making the planetary health diet happen? And can I just say, nobody likes being told what to eat. So
no, absolutely, and this is the age-old question, Mallika, isn't it? Whose responsibility is it? And you will always get a different answer depending on who you speak to. So I'll give you a kind of the answer that I would use for this really big question. And I think you are right that nobody likes being told what to eat, and that actually planetary health diets should not be about lecturing people. But we do know that our food environments, or the places in which we operate, have a big impact on our behaviours. And if you change what's in that food environment, what's on the shelf or what's in the basket, that's also how you can start to change what's on the plate. So right now in the UK, we have this very stark situation where less than 1% of us actually achieve what is called a healthy diet as outlined by government guidance. And part of that is because the food environment around us makes the unhealthy choice the automatic one. So if you think about your high street, for example, or certainly the high streets where I live and the high streets where my kids hang out, often it's the unhealthy choice that is being promoted at us at many occasions during the day. So we would say that businesses and policymakers have a key to unlock this in terms of they determine like what's stocked, how it's priced, and really importantly, how those foods are marketed to make them appealing, and how they are promoted in ways that encourage us on what we need to buy. So when retailers, caterers rebalance their shelves or their menus, their offer, people's choices shift automatically without us even thinking through kind of how those behaviours are happening. And I think we are starting to see some real recognition of that, and also some real progress. So you might be aware, Mallika, that quite a number of local councils now have introduced advertising bans on junk food. And campaigns on the flip side, like Veg Power's Eat Them to Defeat Them campaign, has been really successful in proving how creative marketing can make healthy, planetary health diet foods really exciting and aspirational for people.
That's all absolutely noteworthy. And I think the onus is also for us not to misunderstand those campaigns. When you were talking, I was immediately thinking of those screaming headlines in newspapers that say, local council goes plant-based, and now we're all being forced basically to eat vegetables and beans. But, recognizing that governments have buying power and they have an opportunity to influence what we eat, which in other ways might be difficult for us to do. And actually, those are all adding up to something towards real change. And it's just not people being nannies, the nanny state argument, right?
Absolutely. And there's also organisations that you might follow, the Food Farming and Countryside Commission, who've done a heap of work talking to citizens about what they really want to see in the food system. And actually the whole myth around the nanny state is debunked. Like, people really want to be living in areas where the food system is prioritised. They want their kids to have access to healthy food. This isn't about the nanny state. But I do agree with you that often these things can go down like a lead balloon, Mallika, to use your phrase. And some of that is because
Yes.
it implies less pleasure, right? It implies, restriction. And actually what we're talking about today is diversity and flavour and story and culture. And we need to make sure that when we are focusing on food systems change, we're doing it through inclusive messaging, and we're celebrating the chefs and our community leaders and traditions that are all building up the acceptance of these patterns of eating, which we know are much better for people and planet.
And that's a lovely way to actually focus on it. And it's immediately making me think about the role of people like me, food writers, or
Yeah.
social media influencers, and how much power we have to transform those
Absolutely.
conversations. And just I saw in a cookbook that, like, oh, you could use this because it's really cheap. And I was actually editing this cookbook. I was doing a sensitivity review of it, and I got the publisher to take that out because I was like, cheap food comes at a cost, and these are things we're just perpetuating these really negative conversations, and we should instead
Yeah.
celebrate what is good, and different cuts of meat. So it's about us also promoting vegetables that are seasonal, and trying different ingredients, playing around with textures and flavors, and making things more exciting, I suppose.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's why, for me, it's really exciting to work with people like you, because we're much more on the kind of the science, the policy, the business intervention end. And what you're brilliant at doing is building the confidence and the demand among the public to make these things real, right? And that is so important, that we have to, I think as a community, we have to do a much better job at how we translate what's happening in the kind of policy environment into real life action. And social media for sure has got a huge role to play on that. And we could do another podcast on social media and misinformation and disinformation, couldn't we? But also there is a huge potential for social media and influencers to be driving demand for planetary health diets, showing how that can be achieved, showing how exciting it is actually to eat in a way that is great for human health and is also beneficial to the planet.
Great. Well, I hope all my editors are listening, Ali, is all I'll say. They've been very supportive so far. So fingers crossed, more. What about expenses? What about expenses? One of the things I would love to do more of is eat more organic meat and fish. So actually have less but have better. And it's just so expensive, isn't it? I mean,
It's really
do you have any thoughts on
expensive.
that, coming back to the, inequity? I mean, one of the ways I get around it is buying cheaper cuts that need slow
Yeah.
cooking. Because you can often do that and then have it sitting in the freezer and turn it into things like broths. Do you have any other tips?
Yeah, I love that. So I think there are ways to access foods like eating the whole of the animal rather than just, for example, the chicken breast or whatever, which is super. It's an expensive cut. There are much cheaper cuts. And that takes us back to the point we were just talking about around we need the chefs and we need the influencers to really show people how to use all those different things, which are much easier on the wallet. I guess, though, what I would say is that sometimes there's a bit of a myth, I think, that certain patterns or dietary patterns might be more expensive than others. We know that food price inflation is a real issue for many, many families, and organisations like the Food Foundation are doing a lot of work around that. Yeah, so I think it is really important, Mallika, that we understand that in the evidence base, it shows that healthy and sustainable eating can be achieved without costing more than what the average household currently spends. So there are basics, there are affordable basics, which are kind of the cornerstone of these types of dietary patterns, including the brilliant beans and grains and seasonal produce, and, like you've just eloquently said, less but better meat as well. So I think oftentimes the challenge is price, but it's also availability, and it's the marketing of foods as well, and the promotion of those foods that are encouraging us to have a diet that's based around certain food groups.
And it does boil down to doing a bit more cooking, doesn't it? I mean, I would say this, but, once you know what you're working with and how to add flavour, it then becomes quite straightforward.
Yeah. And how to make things exciting. And I think you've just been speaking about batch cooking as well, which again is one of the easiest ways, not just to have healthier meals, but to reduce our food waste and to do other things which are equally important for the planet as well.
Very much so. So, Ali, on to you now, a little bit of personal download. Let's hear what you cook at home. Do you have any favorite things to make and any favorite chefs and food writers? Apart from me, obviously, only joking. But any others you'd like to share?
So we do love cooking in our house, and you won't be surprised to hear that we eat a lot of beans and legumes. My current favourite dish is a lemon chickpea stew. I don't know if you know this stew, but it's absolutely delicious. So it's lemon chickpea stew, but we chuck into it tons and tons of different types of herbs. Basically anything green that we have, we chuck in on top, and it's absolutely delicious. So that's my favourite meal at the moment. I tend to eat that with rice. And in terms of chefs, I'm really weird because I'm actually not on social media apart from LinkedIn, so I don't see all of the kind of like Instagram and TikTok chefs, but I'm really lucky in that my other half is an incredible chef. So he's often whipping up something amazing in the kitchen, and he uses all sorts of ingredients to make weird and wonderful dishes. So I'm lucky in that he's always cooking up something which is nice to eat in our house.
That is very lucky, Ali, especially given the work you do. You're getting your diversity thanks to him. You've been absolutely fantastic to talk to. And I love how simply you've explained the concepts of things like planetary boundaries and, the planetary health diet. And can I say great work? Please keep it coming. And I'm looking forward to following your journey and learning more from you going forward. So thank you.
And thank you too, Mallika. It's been great to chat to you.